5 or higher and you round up. That's the saying I hear over and over from students. But I got 2 questions for you. Number 1, do your students really understand that rule and know why it works? And number 2, do they actually apply that rule correctly? I'm Christina Tonnevold, the Recovering Traditionalist, and I hope you'll stick around as we investigate the best way to teach your kids to round numbers in our quest to build our math minds so that we can build the math minds of our students. Now, maybe you've heard about rounding numbers on a number line, but you're not exactly sure what that looks like, how you do it. So in today's video, I want to show you a few examples of how to show rounding numbers on a number line. And I got to tell you, the hardest part is getting kids to understand what numbers to put on the number line to begin with. Now, oftentimes I will see lots of activities about rounding on a number line, but the kids already have the worksheet, already has for the kids laid out what numbers go on each side of the number line. And then the kids just have to place the number on the number line. So I'm going to disappear. I'm going to bring up little animations here to show you what it looks like and some things to really be focusing on as you're building the ideas of rounding numbers. And this is an idea I talk about inside of my Number Sense 201 course. So if you've done that course, you've probably seen this before, this idea. But I wanted to share this little piece of the course because it's such a powerful idea that if you've never done rounding on a number line, it makes a world of difference for our students and even for us as adults. So here you go. Here's rounding on a number line. So let's say we want to round 2,635. First question for all kids should be, what are we rounding to? Because there's a lot of things that we could round to here, right? We could round to the nearest 10, the nearest 100, the nearest 1,000. So let's start with the nearest 100. Now, what we tend to tell kids is, okay, look behind it. If it's 5 or higher, you round up. And most kids will be just fine with that saying. I learned it. I did just fine with that. But then there are kids who will misapply that. I was in my daughter's 3rd grade classroom helping out one day, and they were doing some rounding stuff, and this boy had gotten about half of the rounding sheet correct. The other half was incorrect. And so I started digging into his thinking a little bit, and half of the ones he got correct for the wrong reason because of how he was looking at it. But I didn't discover it until I dug into his thinking about the ones he got wrong. But he was rounding. So let's say this was rounding to the nearest 100. Like I said, he was looking at this and looking behind it, and he'd say, if it's 5 or higher, you round up. So he would round this to 2,700. And when I questioned him, tell me about your thinking. Well, he goes, if it's 5 or higher, you round up. And I go, well, what number were you looking at? And he points to the 5. So his thinking was, if there's any number behind that number that is 5 or higher, you round up, right? And so as good intentioned as that strategy is, for our kids who don't understand, they are just memorizing this strategy. Sometimes they're misapplying it, sometimes they're using it correctly, but the idea really is based upon if it's 5 or higher, it's closer to the next benchmark number. So really, we want to help them look at what are the benchmark numbers and then look at, is this number closer to this benchmark or this benchmark? So again, the lovely number line. So just giving them an empty number line with something on each end. And if we're rounding to the nearest 100, what would be our benchmark numbers on each side of this? What's the benchmark that would be higher? What's the one that would be lower when we're looking at hundreds? And so eventually we want kids to get to this point where they notice that, okay, 2,600 would be the lower benchmark, 2,700 is the higher benchmark. And so we're trying to decide between these two things.
Is it closer to 2,700 or is it closer to 2,600? And so in the past, that whole idea of, okay, look behind, if it's 5 or higher, you round up. That is based upon what is in the middle. So it's really about knowing your two benchmark numbers and then what would be the middle point between these two benchmark numbers. What would be the middle point? Right? 2650 is our middle point. And then we're looking at the number as a whole, not just looking at what's behind it. So now we're looking at, okay, if I have 2,635, where would that fall on this number line? Well, it falls below that middle point of 2650. So now it's closer to the 2600 or 2600, whichever way you say it. Okay. So getting kids to think about what are those two benchmark numbers on either side, what's in the middle, and then where does our number fall on that number line tells us which way to round it. Right? And eventually they'll start noticing that if it's the 5, if it's at the 50 or the 500 or the whatever it might be there, that we're going to go up to the higher amount. If it's below that middle point, we go down to the lower amount. Now, again, with this same number, 2,635, your benchmark numbers will change. I'm not always going to use 2,600 and 2,700 because if I want to round to the nearest 10, those numbers are no longer my benchmark numbers. So what would my benchmark numbers be if we're rounding to the nearest 10? If we're looking at the tens place, what are our benchmark numbers? So we want kids to get to the point where they can place the benchmark numbers here and also think about what would that middle point be and then where would our number fall in relation to that. And this one would happen to fall right in the middle, right? And then as we move into thousands, again, we're going to have different benchmark numbers. If I want to round this to the nearest 1,000, what are my two benchmark numbers going to be? 2,000 and 3,000. And then what's in the middle? And then where does my number fall according to that? Okay. So these pieces are really huge. This activity in and of itself is great for helping kids understand those benchmark numbers. What are the benchmark numbers? What benchmark numbers are these closest to? You can do the reverse of this when you give them the two benchmark numbers, where a scaffolding piece of this would be you give the two benchmark numbers and then having them place it. But all too often, kids aren't paying attention to the decision of what was the benchmark numbers. Why did we pick 2,000 and 3,000 when other times we might pick 2,600 and 2,700? What determines what our benchmark numbers are?
Okay, so doing lots of activities where you have your students determine what are those benchmark numbers is the biggest thing. So don't jump straight into rounding and having kids place numbers onto a number line, deciding, where it lies between these. You first got to help them understand what benchmark numbers is that number in between, right? Doing lots of activities, not even talking about rounding, just talking about the benchmarks. What benchmark numbers, what friendly numbers, whatever you want to call them, is that number in between? And would that change if we're looking at our tens versus our hundreds versus our thousands? And then once they get comfortable being able to think about benchmark numbers, then we can ask them to think about, okay, let's now place this on a number line and think about what number would it round to? Which benchmark number is it closest to? Not just which benchmark numbers are on either side, but which benchmark number is it actually closest to? Now, the other thing you did not see in that video was that I showed everything horizontally. My number line was horizontal. I also am a firm believer in showing it lots of different ways. So have your number line going vertically. It doesn't always have to be horizontally. It just worked out that way. It looked nicer on the slides when I showed it horizontally. It was easier to see. But vertical number lines are also really powerful. And we see vertical number lines a lot in our lives. Thermometers, the old school thermometers, not just looking up on your cell phone anymore, but the old school thermometers go up and down. All those fundraising posters that we make, make are basically vertical number lines. So giving kids opportunities to see it horizontally and vertically is really important. But the whole idea is it's not just the rule of if it's 5 or higher, you round up. I want them to understand why. Why is it that every time it's 5 or higher, we round up? What does that 5 really mean when I'm looking at the number as a whole? And placing numbers on a number line in order to help kids round is the best way to help your kids round numbers. I hope that this video has helped you build your math mind so you can go build the math minds of your students. Have a great day.